The station manager's voice cut clean through the departure lounge. She told him he had no business standing in the premium line, that he never had. And she said it loud enough that the whole gate turned to watch. 2 officers arrived inside a minute. Owen and Reyes said nothing while they walked him back from the jet bridge. His mother's funeral now slipping past the edge of anything he could reach. Nobody in that crowd spoke up for him. Nobody knew that the emblem stitched on the tail of that aircraft, and the $8 billion rail and air company behind it belonged, in full, to the man being marched away. So why did he keep quiet? Margaret Vail built Vail Continental out of a single second-hand rail line and a warehouse she leased on credit outside Marin Bay. When she died, the enterprise was worth north of $8 billion. The will was 2 pages. Everything passed to her son, which was possible only because the company had never once opened itself to an outside investor. There was no announcement, no photograph, no note to the staff. The transfer ran through a holding entity called Ashfield Partners, and the name on the public record belonged to a solicitor in another state who had never set foot in a Vail Continental facility. Elias Vail signed the documents in a boardroom on a Wednesday and drove home to a flat with a heater that had been dead since winter. He was 41. For 14 years before that, he had worked under his father's surname at a small freight outfit 2 states over, sorting cargo first, then routing, then managing a depot in the dry middle of the country because his mother believed a person who inherited a company should know what it felt like to close it down at 3 in the morning in the rain. The lesson stuck. So did the habit. He let the executives run the enterprise. He read every report they sent and replied to perhaps 1 in 12. He owned the whole of it. And he moved through his own terminals 2 or 3 times a month without a single soul knowing his face, which was not luck. It was the arrangement he had built for himself. And for the better part of a year it had held exactly the shape he wanted. There were reasons beyond preference. His mother had spent her final 3 years fading in a series of clinics. And during that stretch the leadership had learned to function without an owner in the room. Tearing that apart in a week would have snapped things that were still holding weight. So Elias left the machine running, tracked the figures, and told himself that a company posting clean figures was a company being run well. It was the single lazy assumption he had ever permitted himself. And it was about to come due. 3 people knew his name. The chair of the board, the director of internal review, and a solicitor who did not work in the building. Everyone else, across a workforce of 17,000, knew Vail Continental the way anyone knows a large employer, as a logo and a timetable and a stack of rules that arrived from somewhere overhead. The funeral was fixed for 5 o'clock on the 2nd Friday in September, at the old warehouse in Marin Bay. 1 year since her death. The dockhands who had loaded that first rail line were coming, most of them well past 70 now, and the plan was plain. They would roll the warehouse doors back, someone would speak briefly, and a plaque bearing Margaret Vail's name would go up on the east wall where the sorting bays had stood. Elias had exactly one thing to do that day. Be there. He booked the flight himself, on his own laptop, at 11 the night before. The nonstop was sold out. The routing through the coast hub was sold out. What remained was seat 1C on Vail Continental Flight 907 out of Halloran Field, departing 8:20 in the morning, and it cost more than he would have accepted in any ordinary week. He bought it. It was the last seat on the last aircraft that could put him in Marin Bay before 5. The card was tied to Ashfield Partners. He did not give it another thought. He reached the airport at 6:40 in a charcoal coat he had owned 11 years, work trousers, and boots worn pale across one heel. He carried a single duffel holding a pressed suit, a razor, and a framed photograph he meant to leave on the warehouse wall beside the plaque. He drank a coffee on his feet near a magazine stand and watched his own company move around him. Above the walkway hung a fresh banner in the house colors. Elite Travel Standards. Honoring the guests who matter. He read it twice. It was not phrasing his mother would ever have approved. And he made a note to raise it later. The way he made notes about 100 small things a month. Gate 14 filled early. Elias took a seat by the glass with the duffel between his boots and watched the ramp crew feed the loader. When premium boarding was called, he stood, crossed to the podium, and held out his phone. The agent at the podium wore a badge that read Sylvia Kerr. Somewhere in her 40s, hair scraped back tight, and she took his phone the way a person takes hold of something they have already decided is trouble. She scanned it. The reader chimed green. She read the screen, then looked at him. Then read it again. "This is a 1C, she said. "That's right. Do you have identification?" He handed over his license. She tilted it under the lamp, and something moved across her face that was nearly a smile. "Vail," she said. "That's a bold choice. You went with Vail." "It's my name." "Of course it is." She laid the license face down on the counter next to the reader. Behind him the line had stopped. A man in a tailored coat rocked on his heels and checked his watch. Sylvia typed a while. "The account behind this booking is corporate," she said. "Ashfield Partners. That isn't the name on your license either." "It's an account I'm authorized on." "That isn't what I asked." She kept typing. "Sir, do you have the physical card used for the purchase?" Elias took out his wallet and set the card on the counter. She looked at it without touching it. "I'll need you to step aside while I verify this." He stepped aside. She waved the man in the tailored coat through. Then the next passenger. Then the next. And every one of them glanced at Elias on the way past. Because that is what people do. The gate clock read 7:49 when main cabin boarding began. Elias stood 4 feet from the podium with the duffel on his shoulder and said nothing while 130 people filed past onto an aircraft he owned. At 7:59 he stepped back up. "I have a hard commitment on the other end," he said. "If there's a problem with the fare, charge me the difference and put me in the back. I'll take any seat on the plane." Sylvia looked up from her screen for the first time in 10 minutes. Something in the offer seemed to settle whatever she had already decided. "So you'll take any seat," she said. "Yes. That's interesting. Because the people who actually paid for one seat don't usually offer to sit in the last row." She said it at full volume, and the sound of it carried off the podium and out across the seating. Heads came up. "Sir, I've been doing this 6 years. Every couple of weeks someone comes through my gate with a company card that isn't theirs and a story about authorization. They always want the good seat. And they always turn very reasonable the second you push back. I'm not asking for the good seat. I'm asking to get on the plane." "You're not getting on this plane." A woman near the front of the seating lifted her phone and held it low against her ribs, angled at the podium. Her name was Billionaire, and she was flying home to Marin Bay to see her father. She had watched the last 4 minutes, and something in it had turned her stomach, so she began to record. Sylvia picked up the handset and paged for a supervisor. She kept talking while she waited, half to Elias and half to the room. In the bright flat register of someone who believes she is being watched with approval. "This is what people don't understand about the front cabin," she said. "There's a standard. There's a reason it costs what it costs. You can't just walk up in whatever you happen to throw on and expect to be handed a seat other people work their whole lives for." Elias did not answer. He watched the jet bridge door and the clock above it. Dana Cole arrived from the operations office 2 gates down, lanyard swinging, and Sylvia met her halfway and spoke into her ear for maybe 15 seconds. Dana looked across at Elias, took in the coat and the boots and the duffel. And Elias watched a verdict get reached about him in under 2 seconds. By a woman who had not asked him a single question. "Sir," Dana said, "we're not able to board you today." "Can you tell me the actual problem?" "The reservation's been flagged." "Flagged by whom?" "I'm not able to discuss the flag." The card cleared. The scan came up green. Your own reader said green. "Sir, I'm going to ask you to lower your voice," Dana said, though he had not raised it. Sylvia, standing behind her supervisor now with her arms folded, said the sentence that would eventually play in front of 3,000 employees, and then on every broadcast in the country. "You were never entitled to that cabin," she said. "Not today, not ever. People like you don't belong up front. And everyone standing here knows it." The gate went quiet. Not one person spoke. A man in a rain shell studied his shoes. A woman with a wheeled bag turned toward the window. Billionaire kept her phone up, felt her hands shaking, and did not stop. Dana Cole did not correct her. She did not step in front of her employee, or cool the room, or apologize to the man standing 4 feet away with a bag on his shoulder. She checked her watch, glanced at the jet bridge, and lifted her radio to call for security. And the whole exchange took on the ordinary rhythm of a task moving along on schedule. Elias Vale stood in a terminal with his family's emblem painted on the aircraft beyond the glass, holding a bag with a photograph of his mother inside it, and understood precisely how much power he held in that moment. 2 sentences. That was all it would take. One call to Harlan Rook, the chair of his own board, and the woman in front of him would be off the property inside 10 minutes. He could be in seat 1C before the door sealed, and he could stand in that warehouse at 5 with a plaque and a photograph and the men who had loaded the first line. He waited for as long as it took to breathe out. Then he thought about the banner over the walkway. Honoring the guests who matter. He thought about a gate agent who had said what she said in a crowded terminal, in her company uniform, at full volume, in front of her supervisor, and had not lowered her voice once, and had not looked around to see who was listening. A person doing something they know is wrong looks around. She had not looked around. She had said it the way you recite a policy, and a supervisor had stood beside her and said nothing. That was the part that stopped him. Not the insult. The ease behind it. Sylvia Kerr had not feared consequences. Which meant that in the building his mother had raised there were no consequences for this, which meant this was not one woman having a hard morning. It was a temperature. It was the temperature of the whole room. And if he ended it now with a phone call, he would fire one employee and learn nothing. And it would happen again next Friday at a different gate to someone who did not own the airline. He wanted to know how far down it ran. He could only learn that from where he stood, as the man being removed, because the moment he became the owner in that room, every person in it would begin performing for him, and the truth would go underground for good. An owner is shown a clean building. A passenger is shown the real one. There was a cost, and he counted it while he stood there. The warehouse, the plaque, the men in their 70s who had driven in from 3 states. He was going to miss all of it. And he was going to miss it on purpose. And he understood that his mother would have called that the correct trade without a second's hesitation. Marcus Bell from airport security came up the concourse with a second officer behind him. And Dana pointed at Elias before Bell had finished walking. "Sir, I need you to come with me," Bell said. "I'm not refusing to leave. I still need you to come with me." Elias picked up the duffel and slung the strap over his shoulder. He did not argue. He did not ask for a manager or a name or a complaint form. He walked between the 2 officers down the length of the boarding area, past the seats, past the people who had watched all of it, and said none of it. And behind him he heard Sylvia Kerr lift the microphone and announce, in a bright voice, "Final boarding for Flight 907. At the top of the escalator he stopped and turned around once. The jet bridge door was closing. Through the glass he could see the winglet of the aircraft with his family's emblem on the fuselage in letters 4 feet high. Billionaire stopped recording, sat back down, and saved the file. Then she sent it to herself twice, because her phone had lost things before, and she wrote a note in her drafts with the date, the gate number, and the 2 names she had heard, Kerr, and the supervisor whose badge she had not been near enough to read. Downstairs, Bell walked him as far as the doors and let him go with a nod that had something apologetic in it, and Elias stepped out into the cool air at the departure's curb at 8:21 in the morning. His phone said the drive to Marin Bay was 13 hours. The next seat on any carrier put him there Saturday afternoon. There was no version of the day that ended with him standing in that warehouse at 5. He called the number for the old warehouse, and a man named Cyrus, who had run the loading floor for 31 years, answered on the 4th ring. Elias told him he would not make it. Cyrus said they would hold the plaque until he could come out and hang it himself, and that Margaret would have laughed at a company that could not get her own son onto one of its own planes. Elias said she probably would have. Then he stood at the curb with the duffel at his feet, watching Flight 907 climb out over the far end of the field. He did not feel angry, which surprised him. What he felt was cold and very clear. The way he used to feel at 3 in the morning at the depot when a line went down and someone had to decide what happened next. He opened his phone and scrolled to a contact he had used exactly twice in the year since his mother died. Vera Lang ran internal review. She reported to the board, not to operations. And she was one of the few people inside the company who knew whose name sat behind Ashfield Partners. He typed 4 words, read them once, and sent them. Then he pocketed the phone, picked up the bag with his mother's photograph inside it, and walked off to find a car. The 4 words were, "I need a review." Vera Lang called him back that afternoon from a stairwell at headquarters, because she had learned in 24 years of this work that stairwells do not have cameras. Elias gave her the date, the field, the gate, the flight number, and 2 names. Then he gave her the only instruction that mattered. "Nothing goes through operations," he said. "Not one request, not one email that lands on that floor. If they learn this is running, everyone starts behaving. And I learned nothing." She asked what she was looking for. "I don't know yet," Elias said. "That's the point. Don't start with me. Start with everyone else this has happened to." He drove out to Marin Bay that weekend, 13 hours in a rented car, and arrived Saturday afternoon after everyone had gone home. Cyrus met him at the warehouse with the plaque still boxed and a stepladder, and the 2 of them hung it on the east wall where the sorting bays had stood. Elias set the photograph on the ledge beneath it. Cyrus mentioned that Margaret used to walk the loading floor before dawn and hand coffee to anyone who looked like they were having a rough shift, and that half the reason people stayed 30 years was that she never once acted as though she were better than the people who worked for her. Elias drove back on Sunday and did not tell Cyrus why he had missed Friday. The first thing Vera found was that Billionaire had already filed a complaint. She had submitted it at 4. 19 on the afternoon of the incident, from her father's kitchen in Marin Bay, with a 2-minute and 50-second video attached, and a written statement naming Sylvia Kerr and describing the supervisor she had not been able to identify. The complaint was assigned a case number at 422. It was closed at 5:55:58 that same evening. The closing entry ran one line. Guest presentation concern. No service failure identified. No refund or credit warranted. The manager who entered it was named Grant Halliday, and the file showed the video attachment had never once been opened. Vera pulled every complaint at that field closed under the same code. There were 38 over the past 2 years. She widened it across the system and stopped counting at 291. She sent Elias the summary at 2 in the morning, and he read it sitting on the floor of his flat with his back against the sofa. A retired ironworker in a canvas jacket pulled out of the priority line at a hub in the south and asked twice to prove he had bought his own ticket. A woman traveling in nursing scrubs after a night shift told her upgrade had been processed in error and moved back to the main cabin, while the seat stayed empty the whole flight. A man with a service animal in a soft carrier boarded last after being questioned at the podium, and when he complained, the file was closed in 80 minutes with the same code and the same sentence. Different cities, different agents, and identical language in the closing entries down to the punctuation. Because somebody had written a template and pushed it out to the customer experience managers, and the managers had been using it the way you use a stamp. Vera interviewed 9 of those managers under review authority, which meant they had to answer and were forbidden to tell their supervisors what they had been asked. Grant Halliday was the 6th. He did not deny closing the files. He seemed puzzled that anyone considered it a question. "That's the code we're given," he said. "If it's a presentation issue, it isn't a service failure. Service failures move my numbers. Presentation concerns don't." Vera asked who decided which was which. "The rubric decides," Halliday said. "It isn't a judgment call. That's the whole point of it." She asked what happened to a manager whose service failure numbers went the wrong way. He looked at her a long moment before answering, and when he did, his voice had dropped. "You don't get to that conversation twice," he said. Elias read the transcript twice, and understood that he had been wrong about something for a full year. He had assumed the company was healthy because the numbers were healthy. The numbers were healthy because someone had built a machine that made the ugly things vanish before they could become numbers. The rubric had a name. Vera found it in the 3rd week, buried in a training package that had never been sent to the board. The Elite Travel Standards program had launched 3 years earlier out of the office of Gerald Frost, Executive Vice President of Commercial Operations, and its stated purpose was protecting the integrity of the front cabin. The mechanism was a scoring sheet. Gate agents were trained to assess boarding passengers on a 5-point scale across 3 categories before scanning a premium boarding pass. And the categories were attire, bearing, and travel profile. Attire was defined by example, with photographs. Business dress scored a 5. Casual outerwear and work boots scored a 2. Bearing rewarded passengers who were, in the language of the training deck, at ease in a premium environment. Travel profile pulled loyalty tier and lifetime spend. A passenger scoring below a set threshold triggered what the program called secondary fare verification, which was the polite name for what Sylvia Kerr had done at Gate 14 for 29 minutes. The other half of the machine was the incentive. Agents were measured on a metric called front cabin integrity, and the metric counted verifications initiated and fare irregularities identified. It did not count verifications that came back clean. There was no cost to being wrong, and there was a bonus for being right. And the bonus was real money, paid quarterly, and posted on a leaderboard in the break room at every field in the system. Sylvia Kerr's personnel file completed the picture. 6 years with the company. 2 years and 7 months ago. 5 months after the program launched, she had been formally counseled by Dana Cole for boarding a premium passenger without verification. A man in a fleece pullover whose fare had turned out to be entirely legitimate. The counseling document was in her file. So was the corrective plan that followed it. In the 2 years after that counseling, she climbed to the top of the Western region in front cabin integrity. Her verification volume was 3 times the field average. Her name had led the breakroom leaderboard at Halloran for 5 straight quarters, and her supervisor had written in her latest review that she showed exceptional instincts for protecting the premium product. Elias sat with that file a long time. He had wanted to know whether the woman at Gate 14 was one bad employee. She was not. She was the best employee the system had measured exactly the way it had told her it would. Someone had handed her a scoring sheet with photographs of work boots on it, put a leaderboard on the wall, hung a check off it, and then, when she did the job as designed, had let her say what she said in a crowded terminal without flinching. Because she believed she was carrying out policy. She was. That was the thing. She was carrying out policy. The rot was not in the terminal. The terminal was the last inch of a pipe that ran all the way up to the executive floor, and every manager along its length had been paid to keep it flowing. Elias called Harlan Rook the next morning. The chair of the board had known Margaret Vale for 30 years, and had known Elias since he was a young man sorting cargo 2 states over, and he listened to the whole thing without interrupting once. "How much of this does Gerald Frost know?" Elias asked. "He wrote it," Rook said. "He presents it to us every quarter as a revenue protection initiative. It's in the deck. Nobody on that board ever asked what verification actually looks like at a gate. Including you. Including me." The board had scheduled its strategy announcement for the first Thursday in December, and by then the machinery around it was already in motion, and Elias let it keep moving. The event was billed as the largest internal gathering in the company's history. 3,000 employees in the main hall of the Halloran Convention Center, another 14,000 watching a live feed at fields across the system, and 8 credentialed reporters in a roped section at the back with a camera platform behind them. Every senior officer would be on the floor. The program ran 90 minutes and closed with the announcement of the next chief executive. Gerald Frost had been told by 2 board members that the job was his. He had a suit made for it. His name sat on the second half of the run sheet. Following a segment titled The Next Decade, and the slide package his team submitted proposed expanding elite travel standards to every field in the network by the first quarter of the following year. The word he used in his summary paragraph was scale. The first half of the program was the recognition segment. 12 employees would be brought on stage from across the system, and the final award, Service Employee of the Year, carried a trophy and a check for $10,000 and a photograph with the incoming chief executive. Sylvia Kerr had been nominated by Dana Cole and confirmed by a selection committee that reviewed metrics. Nobody on the committee had ever met her. Her file showed 5 straight quarters atop a leaderboard, and the committee wrote in its citation that she embodied the standard the company was building toward. She flew in the night before, in the front cabin, on a company travel voucher. She had never stood on a stage in her life. Vera Lang finished the review report on the Monday of that week. It ran 204 pages, and its final section was a list of 18 managers and 4 officers, ordered by the number of complaints each had closed under a code that had not existed before Gerald Frost created it. Harlan Rook received it and asked Elias one question, which was whether he wanted the board to handle it privately in a conference room, the way these things were normally handled. Elias said no. He said this had happened to hundreds of people in public, in front of strangers, at podiums and counters in a dozen states, and that every one of them had been made small in a room full of witnesses who said nothing. He said the correction was going to happen in the same place the damage had. Rook asked what he needed. "Change nothing on the run sheet," Elias said. "Don't warn Gerald, don't warn the floor. When the recognition segment ends, give me the stage." The hall was full by 8:30 on Thursday morning. The house lights went down at 9. There were banners on both sides of the stage in the house colors, and the words across them were the same words that had hung over the walkway at Halloran Field 6 weeks earlier. The recognition segment ran 40 minutes. Ramp leads, routers, a train conductor who had worked 32 years without missing a run. Applause each time, 3,000 people loud in a room built to be loud. Sylvia Kerr was called last. She walked out in a navy suit with her hair pinned back the way she always wore it. She took the trophy, thanked her supervisor and her field and the company, and said she had learned to take real pride in protecting the standard. The room applauded her for 7 seconds. Gerald Frost stood at the edge of the stage and clapped with his hands high where the cameras could see them, then went back down the steps to his seat in the front row, 30 minutes from being named chief executive. The lights came up on the podium for the next segment. Harlan Rook walked out and said that before the board addressed the next decade, the sole owner of Vale Continental would like to say something to the company. There was a sound in that hall that was not quite silence, because 3,000 people all shifting at once makes noise. Nobody in the room had ever heard those words used about a living person. The company had a board. The company had officers. Ownership was a structure in a filing, a solicitor's name in another state, and 17,000 people had worked their whole careers under it without once picturing a face behind it. Elias Vale walked out from the wing in a charcoal coat he had owned 11 years. He was halfway to the podium before the noise started at the back of the hall, where a woman from customer relations had seen a copy of the video that month, and it moved forward through the room in a wave. By the time it reached the front rows, Sylvia Kerr was still holding her trophy with both hands. She stood up. She sat back down. Her supervisor, 3 seats away, had gone the color of paper. Elias reached the podium and set a single folder on it and did not open it. 6 weeks ago, he said. I tried to board Flight 907 at Halloran Field with a front cabin ticket I paid for myself. I was refused at the gate for 29 minutes, and then escorted out of the terminal by security in front of about 200 people. I was told I had never been entitled to that cabin, and that people like me do not belong in it. He nodded once toward the technician at the side of the stage, and the screens behind him went to black, and then to a shaky vertical video shot from the fourth row of the seating at gate 14. 3,000 people watched it end to end. When Sylvia Kerr's voice came through the house speakers at full volume, in a room that held every officer of the company and 8 reporters, the sound in the hall changed to something Elias had never heard from a crowd that size. He let the screen go dark before he spoke again. I could have ended that in 10 seconds with a phone call, he said. I didn't, because I wanted to know whether it was one person. It is not one person. The screens filled with the cover page of a 204-page review, and then with the number 2091, and then with a photograph from a training deck showing a pair of work boots scored at 2 out of 5. That scoring sheet was written on the 11th floor of our headquarters and paid for out of a bonus pool, Elias said. The woman at that gate did exactly what this company trained her to do, and rewarded her for doing, and put her name on a leaderboard for doing. She is responsible for what she said. She is not the author of it. He looked toward the front row, at the man in the suit that had been made for a different morning. Gerald, you're relieved of your position effective now. Security will walk you out through the front, past the people whose work you were measuring. Gerald Frost rose halfway out of his seat, and said something that nobody more than 4 feet away could hear. 2 officers from corporate security were already standing at the end of his row. Elias turned to the other side of the front section. Kerr, your employment with Vail Continental is terminated as of this morning. You will leave that trophy on the seat. Then he looked out at 3,000 people sitting under banners that said honoring the guests who matter, and he said the only sentence any of them would repeat that night. My mother started this company on the idea that everyone who walks up to our counter is somebody. We took that, and we wrote a rubric to sort them. Every one of us in this room has been living off that. Including me. The video was on 3 national broadcasts before the hall emptied. The reporters at the back had come for a chief executive announcement. What they left with was footage of an owner nobody had known existed, a 204-page review, and a training slide that scored a pair of work boots at 2 out of 5. By 4 that afternoon, the story had moved out of the business section and into the front of every newscast in the country. The first wave was about the humiliation. The second, which started about 30 hours later and did far more damage, was about the rubric. 2 competitors issued statements within a day confirming they had no comparable program, which put every carrier's practices in play and left Vail Continental alone in front of a conversation that now involved the whole industry. A congressional subcommittee announced it would take testimony on discriminatory treatment in commercial travel, and the Department of Transportation opened a review of complaint handling at the company and requested 3 years of case files. Bookings fell 9% inside 9 days. 2 of the 5 largest corporate travel contracts in the portfolio suspended new bookings pending review, and the agency that rated the company's debt put it on negative watch. The first serious meeting happened on the Sunday after, in a conference room at headquarters with the blinds down and 14 people around the table. Outside counsel was blunt. The review had been produced under attorney direction, which made it privileged, which gave the company a defensible legal basis for never releasing another page of it. What had gone out from the stage was already out. Everything else could stay sealed, and his recommendation was that it should. The head of communications agreed and had a plan built on it. A short statement of regret. 1 executive already gone, 1 employee already terminated. A commitment to review policies. 90 days of quiet. And the story would be replaced by another story, because they always were. The chief financial officer put a number on the alternative. 291 identified passengers, most of whom had never been told the company had confirmed what happened to them. Publishing the review handed every one of them a documented claim, and invited the class action that would follow. His estimate ran into the hundreds of millions before legal costs, and he said without any particular cruelty that no company in America would choose that voluntarily. Harlan Rook let all of it be said. Then he turned to the end of the table, where Elias Vail had been sitting without speaking for 40 minutes. 2 board members had been pushing the same line since Thursday night, and their argument would have won in almost any other company. The point had been made. The guilty were gone. 17,000 jobs depended on a brand that could not survive 6 more months as the industry's example. Elias understood the arithmetic, and did not dispute it. What he kept returning to was Grant Halliday in the review transcript. saying he had closed the file because that was the code he was given, without any sense that he had done anything. Halliday had not been a cruel man. He had been a man in a system where the ugly thing had a code, and the code made it disappear. Sealing the review was the same move in a nicer room. If he made it, everything he had said from that stage was a performance, and the company would learn the lesson it had already learned 291 times. Which is that the correct response to being caught is to close the file quietly. If we seal it, Elias said, then the thing I fired Gerald Frost for is the thing we're doing in this room. Counsel started to explain the distinction. Elias let him finish. I hear you, Elias said. You're right about the exposure, and I'm not going to pretend the number isn't real. But I spent a year believing this company was healthy, because nobody ever sent me anything that said otherwise, and that happened because we built a machine for not sending things. I'm not fixing that machine by using it one more time. The communications lead asked what he intended to release. All of it, Elias said. 204 pages, unredacted except for passenger names. Every complaint code, every closing entry, every manager on that list. And we contact all 291 of those people directly before it goes public, because they should not find out from a broadcast. The chief financial officer asked whether he understood he was funding the lawsuits against himself. I understand I owe them a settlement whether or not a court makes me pay one, Elias said. The board convened the next morning, and Rook opened by noting for the record that no vote was required. There were no outside shareholders. There was one owner. The owner had already decided. And every person in that room served at his discretion. Elias asked for the vote anyway, and Rook asked why, since he could give the instruction and be done by lunch. Because an instruction lasts exactly as long as I do, Elias said. If I hand this down, then transparency is my personal preference, and the next owner can reverse it in an afternoon. If this board votes for it, it belongs to the company. One of the two members who had been pushing to seal it asked the obvious question, which was what Elias would do if the vote went against him. I'd release it anyway, Elias said. And then I'd know something about this board that I don't currently know. It carried by 2. The review went out on a Wednesday morning at 7, posted in full on the company's own site, with no embargo and no spin. Every passenger in the file had been reached in the 8 days before that. And each was told what had been documented in their case, who had closed it, and what the company was prepared to do about it. Vera Lang's team made those calls themselves on Elias's instruction. He made 41 of them personally. And the first was to the retired ironworker in the South, who had been asked twice to prove he had paid for his own ticket. The man did not want money. He wanted to know whether anybody had actually read his complaint at the time. Elias told him the truth, which was that nobody had opened it, and that the file had been closed in under 2 hours by a manager working from a template. The man was quiet a while, and then said he had spent 30 years around steel, and had always liked this company, and that this was the first time anybody from it had spoken to him like a person. Elias wrote that sentence down and kept it. Billionaire got a call too. She had not asked for anything, had not sold the video, and had never spoken to a reporter. She was offered a role in the new customer advocacy office and took it. The first thing she did in that job was rewrite the intake form so that a complaint with a video attached could not be closed until somebody had opened the file. The rebuild took the better part of a year, and it started with the thing that had caused it. Elite Travel Standards was eliminated in its entirety on the Monday after the announcement. Not revised. Not revised. Not renamed. Not scaled back into a smaller version of itself. The scoring sheet was pulled from every training package in the system. The photographs were destroyed. And front cabin integrity came out of the compensation plan of every gate agent at every field. The leaderboards came down that same week, and in about half the break rooms, the agents took them down themselves before anybody from headquarters arrived. The bonus pool that had funded it survived. Elias moved the money to a metric that counted how many passengers a field had actually solved a problem for, which was harder to measure and much harder to gain, and told operations that if the number ever looked suspiciously clean, he would assume it was manufactured and audit the field. Verification of a premium boarding pass was reduced to what it should always have been. If the scan came up green, the passenger boarded. If the system flagged a real payment failure, a supervisor resolved it away from the podium and out of public hearing. Under no circumstance could a passenger's appearance, clothing, bearing, or manner of speech enter any decision about their travel. That sentence went into the operations manual as its own numbered section. Every one of the 17,000 employees went through a new program over the following 8 months, and it was not the kind of training people click through. It ran a full day, and it opened with the video from Gate 14. Played without commentary. followed by audio from the review interviews, in which managers explained in flat professional language how a complaint became a code, and a code became nothing. The last hour had no slides. Passengers who had been on the receiving end of the rubric sat at the front of the room and described what those minutes at a podium had felt like, and one of them, at a dozen sessions across the Western region, was the retired ironworker from the South. The principle at the end of the program was one line, printed on nothing and sold with no logo. Every passenger who walks up to the counter gets the same respect, and it is not conditional on what they are wearing or what they spent. The people who had covered for it were handled the way the rules said, which was slower and less satisfying than the stage had been. 18 managers and 4 officers went through a formal review, with representation, documentation, and a written finding in every case. 8 were terminated. 7 were demoted out of any role with authority over customer decisions. 7 kept their jobs with findings in their files, because the record showed they had objected in writing and been overruled. And a purge that swept up the people who had tried would have taught the workforce that speaking up was the dangerous option. Dana Cole was terminated in the second week of the review. She had counseled Sylvia Kerr for boarding a passenger without verification, had written the review praising her instincts, had stood 4 feet away at gate 14, and said nothing, and had then nominated her for the highest service award in the company. Grant Halliday was removed from any complaint handling role and stayed with the company in scheduling, and he volunteered, without being asked, to walk the review team through every closing template he had ever been given. Gerald Frost sued for wrongful termination and dropped it 4 months later, once the discovery calendar was set. He did not work in the industry again. Sylvia Kerr gave one interview about 6 weeks after the ceremony. She said she had done what she was trained and paid and rewarded to do, that she had been written up once for the opposite, and that she had led her region for 5 straight quarters doing exactly what the company measured. She also said, and this was the part that got quoted, that she had chosen the words she used at that gate herself, and nobody had written those for her. Elias was asked about the interview twice and said the same thing both times, which was that she was accurate on both counts. And he had nothing to add. There was one part of it he did not defend. And he said so once, in a room with the new leadership team and no cameras in it. 18 managers had gotten a process, a hearing, a file, a written finding, the right to answer. The 2 people he removed himself had gotten none of that, in front of 3,000 colleagues, because he had been standing there with the review in his hand, and the anger still in him. He said he would make the same decision about Gerald Frost again. He said he was not sure about the other one, and that a man who tells a company its rules apply to everyone should be careful about the day he suspends them for himself. The recovery showed up about 10 months later, and it did not look like a rebound so much as a different company reading the same instruments. Vail Continental finished the following year rated first among all United States carriers in customer service, first in complaint resolution, and first in employee trust and leadership, which Harlan Rook said would have meant the most to Margaret Vail. Voluntary turnover at the fields dropped by nearly a third. Bookings passed their previous peak 14 months after the ceremony. The lawsuits were settled without a single case reaching a courtroom, and the total came in under the estimate on that conference room table, though Elias would have paid the higher figure and had told the board so in writing. He did not become a public figure. He gave no interviews and turned down a magazine cover that would have run under the words "The owner nobody knew." The board asked him twice to take the chief executive title himself, and he declined both times. And the person they hired had spent 26 years in operations, and had never once worked on an executive floor. Elias kept the flat and fixed the heater himself in the spring. He was back at Halloran Field on a Friday in September, almost a year to the day, in the same charcoal coat with the same duffel, holding a boarding pass for a seat in the main cabin, because it was the one he had wanted this time. The banner over the walkway was gone. What hung there now was a schedule board and nothing else, which was what his mother had put there in the first place. The agent at gate 14 was somebody new. She scanned his pass, watched the reader chime green, and told him to have a good flight. The entire transaction took 4 seconds, and required nothing from him but the pass in his hand. She had no idea who he was. That was the point, and the whole of what he had learned. He flew to Marin Bay and drove out to the old warehouse, where Cyrus had the doors open and the light coming across the concrete in a long rectangle. The plaque was on the east wall where the sorting bays had stood, and the photograph was still on the ledge underneath it, and the 2 of them stood there a while without needing to say much. Cyrus asked him finally why he had really missed the service the year before. Elias told him all of it, start to finish, and it took about 20 minutes. Cyrus listened the way men of that generation listen, without interrupting and without any visible reaction. And when it was over, he said that Margaret would have done the same thing and taken about 4 times as long to do it. because she never could keep her mouth shut for 29 minutes. They locked the warehouse at dark. And the last thing Elias saw before Cyrus pulled the door down was the plaque catching the light from the yard. One name on a wall in a building where nobody had ever needed to be told who mattered here. He drove back to the airport for the last flight out. And somewhere on that road he finally understood the thing his mother had tried to teach him with a cargo car 2 states over. Power is not the ability to tell a room who you are. Anyone with enough money can do that, and the moment they do, every person in the room begins arranging themselves around it. And nothing honest happens again. The real measure is quieter. It is how a person treats the ones who can do nothing for them. The ones standing at a counter in work boots with a bag on their shoulder and no way to prove they matter. So never decide what a person is worth from their clothes, their title, or the way they look walking up to you. Respect is not earned by money or power, and it is not a reward for being useful. It belongs to everyone, and it should be handed over before you know a single thing about who you are handing it to. The ones who actually have something never need to announce it. What they are is already visible in how they treat the people who cannot repay them.